Hello everyone, this is David, and tonight's X-Files episode that we're looking into is the third episode of the first season, aptly named Squeeze. Now, Squeeze is the first in a long line of Monster of the Week episodes. We're not dealing with aliens or government conspiracies here, we're dealing with something else. Something that doesn't easily fit into a category. Whether or not you believe in extraterrestrials, or that extraterrestrials are visiting Earth and conducting all sorts of experiments, you can easily wrap your head around the idea of extraterrestrials, non-human entities that come from another planet. Simple enough. Science says they should exist out there somewhere. Whether or not they're coming here, there's really no proof for at the moment. But you can believe one way or the other, and that's fine. But in this, now we're going to delve into all sorts of things. The Monster of the Week is open, very open-ended. It could be anything. In this case, we're dealing with a man named Toombs. A very strange man, as you will find out. He has a unique set of abilities. So, it opens up with a businessman walking out, and he's being watched by a pair of eyes from a storm drain, which are very creepy. And he goes into his building, and someone jumps out and kills him, and they're investigating his murder. This is the third such murder that has happened. No one's really sure how these are happening, because the murders have no apparent entry point, and in each case the victim's liver has been removed. So that's very strange. And the agents look into this, and Mulder traces it to a series of murders from every 30 years, effectively. In the 30s, in the 60s, and now in the 90s. And he posits that there might have been more murders even before that, but they just don't have records of it. Back in the early 1900s, back during the dawn of the 20th century, 1903, and then back before that, in say the 1873. He posits, but there's no evidence per se. It's just more of a interesting thing, a note that Mulder makes. However, in his investigation, he finds a fingerprint on an air vent, which is all distorted and weird, and they run it. And they end up arresting this guy Toombs, Eugene Victor Toombs specifically. I forget exactly what they get him for, but he passes his polygraph test, and they let him go because they can't really. He's just like this. If I remember correctly, he's like a janitor or something, and he's just really this unimpressive guy. And they were going to let him go, but the only person that believes he did it is Mulder. And Mulder added a few questions to the polygraph test. One of which is, are you over like 100 years old or something like that? To which he failed. I think there are two questions. I forget what the other one was, but that was one of them. And the guy who was issuing them was really upset that Mulder would even put those questions on there. And he's like, of course he failed. It's such an absurd question. Like, who would know that? And the thing about polygraph tests is, polygraph tests are really not great ways of judging truth when it really boils down to it. All it can do is tell you what your heart rate was at a given question based upon a baseline. And that information is extrapolated by an expert who then gives you their opinion. The problem with this is, if, say, you are a sociopath or similar such person, you will have no emotional response or heightened sense to things like lying, because you honestly don't care. It's all self-preservation and whatnot. So you won't register on that sort of thing, because it judges heart rate, pulse, like your skin temperature, sweat, like all those little things, so like cues. But if you don't have any of those cues, or you've trained yourself to deal with them, which you can do, it takes a lot of training, but you can do it, you're not going to give those off, which is why polygraphs aren't great. Not to mention if you're already under duress, like if you're already stressed out, or you've had a bad day or something like that, your test is going to be all weird anyway. It'll be very hard to read. So it doesn't work 100% anyway. But anyway, so Mulder feels it's this guy, and they're looking into it, and it turns out, it turns out it is Toombs, because he has a magical ability to be able to to distort and elongate his body and squeeze into anything. And it's quite disturbing when we actually see this, as he squeezes through all sorts of things. And they can't find any documentation on him or where he came from or any of that stuff. And they go talk to a person who investigated the previous set of murders, I guess from 1933. The guy doesn't look that old, so I feel they kind of goofed here. They probably should have done 1966, because that was only 30 years before and would be more reasonable, as opposed to a guy who was investigating this stuff 60 years before and would probably easily be in his 90s, or at the very least 80s. But they see an image of Toombs who's not aged, and that's very strange. And they give him the address of his former building, and they find him there. They find a nest filled with bile, and it's very strange. And there's trophies from all the victims, like serial killers like to keep. And Mulder postulates that Toombs is some sort of mutant. He's some sort of aberration that has the ability to survive through time. And he postulates that he does this by consuming human livers. He makes himself a nest and hibernates for 30 years after murdering enough people to feed him for that time. And he eventually tries to go after Scully, and they end up catching him in the end. But this isn't the end for Little Toombs, because he'll be coming back in another episode. However, he was a very interesting character, and one of the very few monsters that gets a second episode. Unfortunately, we don't get to learn the true nature of his abilities, only that they exist. Like, he can distort his body and basically bend himself into different like shapes and whatnot. Although, there's an episode in the third or fourth season called Taliko, where there's a monster with very similar powers and abilities to this, which posits that these might not be as uncommon as you might think. Again, in that episode, you deal with a monster that has the ability to fit in weird places and requires certain nutrients it can't get otherwise to continue its life. It has slightly different properties than the Toombs in this episode, but it's similar enough where it's an easy note to make. Anyway, I'm very much like this one, and it's very creepy. I'm gonna give this one an 8 out of 10. It's the first monster of the week, and you should check it out. It's pretty good. All right, folks. See you next time.